July 6, 1973, 1 p.m. An 11-year-old girl walked out of the doors of Lincoln Intermediate School in Corona del Mar, California, and started her journey home. She never made it. Her name was Linda Ann O'Keefe. And for the next 46 years, the only thing standing between her killer and complete freedom were a single biological evidence sample stored in a refrigerator and a photograph hanging on the wall of a police station that no one ever took down. Think about that for a moment. 46 years. This wasn't just an unsolved case. It was an entire generation. What makes a police department keep the photograph of a little girl on its wall for nearly half a century? This is the story of how they finally got the answer. The summer of 1973 was the first summer that felt anything like peace. Earlier that year, American troops had officially withdrawn from Vietnam. Soldiers were coming home. And in Newport Beach, California, an affluent coastal community where people bought homes overlooking the Pacific Ocean and sent their children to summer classes, the idea of a violent crime seemed like something that happened somewhere else. Linda Ann O'Keefe was exactly the kind of child you would expect to find in a place like that. 11 years old, attending summer school at Lincoln Intermediate, walking a familiar route home that she had traveled many times before. On July 6, 1973, at 1 p.m., she left school and began that walk. One witness saw her. One person who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. They saw Linda standing beside a turquoise van, speaking with the driver. A white male, approximately 25 to 30 years old, was behind the wheel. The witness did not see her get inside. They did not see where the van went. There was no license plate number, no name, no description beyond the man's age, race, and the color of the vehicle. It was the last confirmed sighting of Linda Ann O'Keefe alive. Less than 24 hours later, at 8:15 a.m. on July 7, 1973, her body was found, Pack Bay, a wild natural area on the edge of Newport Beach, a drainage ditch near a nature trail, partially concealed by brush, not far from the route she was supposed to take home. The autopsy confirmed the worst. Linda had been abducted, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Here's what remained hidden for decades. Investigators knew that biological evidence had been recovered from Linda's body, evidence that could one day identify her killer, and they made a decision that would prove to be the single most important choice in the entire case. They preserved it. In 1973, a forensic pathologist named Jim White collected and carefully preserved that biological evidence. At the time, DNA technology did not exist in criminal investigations. There was no national DNA database. There was no concept that genetic material from a crime scene might one day build a family tree and lead investigators to a name. Jim White preserved the evidence anyway. Stop for a moment and think about what that actually means. In 1973, preserving biological evidence from a crime scene was not standard practice in every police department in America. Jim White made a professional decision that this evidence mattered, that it needed to be stored properly, and that some future version of this investigation might need it. He had no idea what it would be used for. He could not have known. The technology that would eventually use that evidence did not exist yet, and would not exist for decades. He preserved it anyway. Because good investigators preserve evidence, even when they do not yet know why. In the weeks after Linda's body was found, the Newport Beach Police Department chased every available lead. They checked California vehicle records, searching for turquoise vans. They questioned men in the area who matched the witness description. They looked for anyone with a connection to Lincoln Intermediate or to the neighborhood where Linda had been walking. Nothing held. The turquoise van was never identified. Vehicle registration records across California led nowhere. The men they checked either had explanations or could not be connected to the crime. The investigation produced paperwork, effort, and dead ends. What they did not know, and could not have known, was that Linda's killer had no criminal record in California. He had moved to Southern California from Chicago before the murder. A man with no deep roots and no real history in the region. No name in any database. No flag in any system. And shortly after July 6, 1973, he disappeared. He left California. He moved to Florida. He put geographical distance between himself and the Newport Beach police. And then he did something calculated, something that showed this was not impulsive panic. He changed his name. The man who had lived in Orange County, California, as James Albert George Layton became James Allen Neal. Different name, different state. A new life built over the one he had erased. While Newport Beach police were looking for James Layton, James Neal was building something new. And this is where the story becomes something I want you to seriously think about. The Newport Beach Police Department kept Linda and O'Keefe's photograph on the wall of its station for 46 years. Not because policy required it. Not because someone filled out the right paperwork. Because the people who worked there made a collective, unspoken decision that this case was not closed. New officers who joined the department after Linda's death grew up looking at her face on that wall. Detectives who spent entire careers working her case retired and were replaced by others who inherited the same question. Different people, different decades, the same photograph. When was the last time you were part of an organization that kept a promise for 46 years? In the late 1990s. More than 2 decades after Jim White preserved the biological evidence, Newport Beach police sent that evidence to a laboratory and developed a complete DNA profile of the suspect. In 2001, that profile was uploaded into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, a national database containing genetic profiles from individuals arrested or convicted of serious crimes. No match. James Allen Neal had never been arrested for anything that would have required a DNA sample. At the time, he was living freely in Colorado, a man in his 50s. To everyone who knew him, he was simply a retiree living quietly in Monument, Colorado. What investigators did not know was that between 1995 and 2004, more than 20 years after Linda's murder, he sexually assaulted 2 more young girls in Riverside County, California. 2 more children, while Linda's case remained cold, while her photograph hung on that wall. An unsolved case is not just delayed justice. It is an open door. On July 7, 2018, exactly 45 years to the day after Linda's body was found in Back Bay, the Newport Beach Police Department did something no American law enforcement agency had ever done before. At 8 o'clock in the morning, they paused all regular content on their Twitter account. And for the entire day, they told Linda's story in her own voice, one tweet at a time, in chronological order. From the morning of July 6, 1973, when an 11-year-old girl walked to summer school, to the following morning when her body was found. Every tweet was Linda speaking.
Hi, I'm Linda O'Keefe, or Linda and O'Keefe if I've ever done anything wrong to my mother. 45 years ago today, I disappeared from Newport Beach. I was murdered. My body was found in Back Bay. But now, 45 years later, I have a voice again. And I have something important to say. There's a new lead in my case. A face created from DNA left behind by the killer. Technology that didn't exist in 1973. But it could change everything today.
These tweets spread across the internet within hours. People who had never heard of Newport Beach, who had no connection to 1973, who had not even been born when Linda was murdered, began sharing her words. The campaign continued throughout the day. Every hour brought another tweet, another moment from the final day of an 11-year-old girl's life. Department spokesperson Jennifer Manzella later explained the idea behind the campaign. They did not want people to simply read about Linda's case. They wanted people to walk home from school with her, to stand beside that turquoise van, to feel what it was like not to make it home. Alongside the Twitter campaign, Newport Beach police released something else, a portrait of the suspect created not from a witness description, but through DNA phenotyping technology. A reconstruction of the killer's face built entirely from the genetic material that Jim White had preserved 45 years earlier. The face of the man who had been sitting in the turquoise van, built from evidence that had remained in storage since 1973. The public attention generated by the campaign gave Newport Beach police what they needed for the next step. They partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a private forensic DNA analysis company, and began the process of genetic genealogy. The suspect's DNA profile was uploaded to Family Tree DNA, a public database where millions of Americans had voluntarily shared their genetic information to research their family history. This process takes time. It is not a database search that produces an instant answer. It requires analysts to manually build family trees, cross-reference historical records, birth certificates, marriage records, obituaries, census data, and every other source that helps map family connections until the profile at the center can be linked to a living person. In January 2019, 6 months after the Twitter campaign, the results came back. The family tree pointed to a single name: James Allen Neal, 72 years old, Monument, Colorado, a former resident of Orange County, California, during the early 1970s, previously known as James Albert George Layton. Investigators did not move immediately. They placed Neal under surveillance. They monitored his movements. They waited for him to discard something, anything that contained his DNA as part of his everyday life. Eventually, he did. The sample was collected, sent to a laboratory, and compared to the DNA profile recovered from Linda's body, the same evidence Jim White had preserved in 1973 without knowing why it might one day matter. The man who had been sitting behind the wheel of the turquoise van on July 6, 1973, had changed his name, moved across multiple states, and lived freely for 46 years. He was ultimately identified because one medical examiner chose to preserve evidence decades before the technology existed to understand its value. On February 19, 2019, James Allen Neal was arrested at his home in Monument, Colorado. He was charged with murder under special circumstances of kidnapping and lewd acts upon a child under the age of 14. He was also charged in connection with sexual assaults against 2 young girls in Riverside County. The following day, February 20, 2019, the Newport Beach Police Department and the Orange County District Attorney's Office held a press conference. Standing at the podium was Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer. In 1973, Todd Spitzer was 12 years old, nearly the same age as Linda. He grew up in Southern California with this case as part of the community's memory, the story of the little girl who never made it home from summer school. Now he was announcing that her killer had finally been found.
This significant arrest demonstrates that we never give up on solving cold cases.
Newport Beach Police Chief John Lewis added,
Linda never made it home that day. For 45 years, generations of our investigators never gave up. We never forgot Linda.
But this is where the story takes its final painful turn. On May 25, 2020, James Allen Neal was hospitalized with an undisclosed illness. 2 days later, on May 27, 2020, he died at the age of 73. He died in custody before the case could ever be presented to a jury. Before the evidence was fully examined in court. Before Linda's family could hear a verdict after waiting nearly half a century for answers. District Attorney Todd Spitzer said it plainly.
The death of James Neal before trial denied the O'Keefe family the justice they deserved.
Chief Lewis added,
We intended to bring James Allen Neal before a court of law to answer for the murder of Linda and O'Keefe.
Although investigators had finally identified and arrested the man they believed was responsible, his death meant that the case would never reach the courtroom and the O'Keefe family would never see the judicial process brought to its conclusion. This case leaves behind 3 things. The first is Jim White's decision in 1973. A forensic investigator who collected and preserved biological evidence at a time when nobody knew what it might one day reveal. He did not know about genetic genealogy or DNA phenotyping. He simply did his job. Because good investigators preserve evidence, even when they do not yet know its value. The second is the 2018 Twitter campaign. Newport Beach Police had no new leads. What they had was the determination to ask an old question in a new way. The campaign led directly to genetic genealogy analysis, which identified James Neal 6 months later. Not a press release, not a television report. A little girl's story, given a voice again 45 years later. The third is the hardest to accept. While Linda's case remained unsolved, James Neal went on to commit new crimes against children. 2 more young girls became victims of a man the system had not yet found. That is why a cold case is not simply delayed justice. Before you go, ask yourself one question: what stays with you most from this story? Jim White preserving evidence in 1973, the campaign that gave Linda her voice back after 45 years, or the fact that the suspect died before Linda's family ever heard a verdict. If stories like this mattered to you, stay with us. There are many more that still deserve to be told.